The sky was the color of old copper, heavy with heat, and the wind carried the sour smell of something long dead. Jonah Pike reined in his horse at the sight of a wagon lying belly up in the sand, its wheels like broken bones pointing at the sun. The desert didn't leave much behind, just what it couldn't swallow. He swung down from the saddle, boots crunching over dry earth. The horse flicked its ears, uneasy, as though it too felt the stillness. Jonah's shadow stretched long and thin across the wagon remains. He scanned for buzzards, for coyotes, for signs of who or what might have been left behind. That's when he heard it, so faint he thought it was the wind whining through spokes. A sniffle. Jonah moved slow, his spurs barely whispering. There, crouched behind a wagon wheel half buried in sand, was a girl no older than 6. Her dress hung in tatters, hair stiff with dust, lips cracked pale. She clutched her knees to her chest and stared at him like a cornered animal. He went still. The desert could be cruel, but cruelty wasn't what she needed. "Easy now," he said, voice low, the way he'd soothe a spooked colt. "I ain't here to hurt you." The girl blinked but didn't answer. A grasshopper sprang between them and she flinched hard, pressing herself into the wheel's shadow. Jonah crouched until the brim of his hat shielded his eyes. "You alone out here?" She nodded once, jerky. Her throat worked before any sound came. "I lost my mama," she whispered. "She went to find water and never came back." The words were flat, too practiced, as though she'd been saying them to the wind just to hear another voice. Jonah felt something shift in his chest, a long-buried ache. "How long you been waitin'?" Her shoulders lifted in the smallest shrug. He looked around. The sand carried no fresh tracks, no promise of help coming. The girl's small hand was raw where the sun had blistered it. If he left her, she'd be gone by morning, just another set of bones for the desert to keep. "I got a horse," he said after a pause, "and a place with shade. You can ride with me, if you're willin'." She watched him like she didn't know whether to trust the words or the man. "Tell you what," he said gently. "I'll sit right here till you decide." He lowered himself to the ground, cross-legged in the dirt. The sun burned the back of his neck, sweat running down between his shoulder blades, but he stayed quiet. The girl's gaze darted from him to the horse and back again, her breath coming in little shallow pulls. Finally she rose, so slow it seemed her bones might creak, and stepped toward him. Her feet left prints that looked too small to belong to any living thing. Jonah stood and offered a calloused hand. She hesitated only a heartbeat before putting her tiny palm against it. It felt like holding a bird. "That's it," he murmured, lifting her carefully. "Let's get you out of this sun." He swung her onto the saddle and climbed up behind, feeling how light she was, like nothing at all. She gripped the horn with both hands, knuckles white, and he guided the horse forward. For a while there was no sound but the creak of leather and the slow plod of hooves. The land stretched wide and empty, sky so big it made a man feel small. Jonah's mind drifted to the wife he'd buried 3 winters back, the little grave under the cottonwood tree. Maybe that was why the sight of the girl hit him so hard. He knew what it was to lose someone and keep waiting for them to come back. The girl spoke at last, her voice almost lost to the wind. "Are you gonna take me to town?" Jonah shifted in the saddle. "Town's a ways off. My place is closer." She was quiet, then said, "Mama told me not to talk to strangers." He almost smiled, though there wasn't much humor in it. "Reckon that's good advice. But seein' as I already know your story, guess that makes us less than strangers." She turned her face toward the horizon, watching the sun sink. Her small body leaned back against him, a hint of trust, or maybe just exhaustion. By the time they reached the rise where Jonah's cabin stood, the first star had pricked the sky. He could see the windmill turning slow, hear the faint rattle of the pump. The girl didn't speak again, but when he swung down and reached for her, she didn't resist. Jonah carried her inside, the cabin smelling of dust and pine resin. He set her gently on the cot and covered her with a wool blanket. Her eyelids fluttered, fighting sleep. "Rest now," he said softly. But before her eyes closed, she asked, "If Mama comes back, how will she find me?" Jonah stood there a long moment, hat in hand, words heavy in his throat. "We'll leave the lantern burning," he said at last, and lit the lamp so its glow spilled into the night. Outside, the wind rose, and somewhere far off, a coyote cried. Jonah sat by the window, watching the road vanish into darkness, and wondered if tomorrow would bring the child's mother, or just more silence from the desert. Morning broke pale and cool, the desert still holding its breath from the night. Jonah Pike rose early, same as always, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots. The girl still slept on the cot, hair fanned out against the pillow, one small hand curled around the edge of the blanket like she feared it might be taken. He stepped lightly, not wanting to wake her, and stoked the fire until the room filled with the smell of coffee and wood smoke. By the time the beans were simmering, she stirred, blinking at him as though unsure whether he was real. "Hungry?" he asked. She nodded, sitting up, her hair a wild halo. He handed her a tin cup of water first. She drank too fast, water spilling down her chin, and he gently placed a hand on the cup. "Slow," he said. "Plenty more where that came from." She obeyed, and when she finished, he set a plate before her. She ate with quick, desperate bites until she caught him watching and slowed again. There was a shyness about her, but also a stubborn spark, as though she meant to show she could manage on her own if it came to it. When she was done, Jonah stepped outside to draw more water. The windmill groaned as the pump handle rose and fell. He glanced back at the cabin and saw her small face peering through the window, cautious and curious at once. Later that morning, he saddled the mare and set her on the fence rail to watch as he worked the corral. She swung her legs, silent but attentive, as though she meant to memorize every movement. When a calf bawled, she laughed, her first sound of joy since he'd found her, and Jonah felt something unclench in his chest. That night, he brought out a needle and thread, mending the torn hem of her dress by firelight. His big hands weren't made for fine work, but he tried, tongue caught between his teeth as he stitched. She watched him solemnly, then offered, "Mama used to do that." "Reckon she taught you some?" The girl nodded. "Then you can show me if I'm doing it wrong," he said, and she did, guiding his hand with her own tiny one. When he tied off the thread, she looked almost proud. The next day, he rode with her into town for supplies. The general store's bell jingled, and conversation hushed for a moment. Folks noticed things quick out here, especially things they thought didn't belong. "That Pike's taken in some child," Jonah heard one woman whisper behind the barrel of molasses. "Found her out in the flats, they say. Nobody knows where she come from." A man at the counter grunted. "Ain't right, man livin' alone keepin' a stray like that." Jonah kept his back straight, jaw tight, and finished his business without looking their way. The girl stayed close to his leg, eyes wide, soaking up every murmur like it might decide her fate. Before leaving town, he took her to the little clapboard church. It was Sunday, and the preacher stood by the steps, greeting folks. His gaze softened when he saw her, dirt-smudged and thin. "Child," he said kindly, resting a weathered hand on her head, "whoever welcomes one such as you in his name welcomes him." The girl stared up at him, uncertain, but Jonah saw the words land somewhere deep. On the ride home she was quiet until they reached the rise where the ranch came into view. "Do they think I shouldn't stay with you?" she asked suddenly. Jonah glanced down at her, her small hands gripping the saddle horn. "Some folks talk more than they know," he said. "What matters is you're safe. That's what I aim to keep you." Her shoulders eased a little, but her gaze lingered on the horizon, as though she feared the world might still come to take her away. That evening, Jonah fixed a simple supper, bacon, beans, bread, and set the plate before her. She bowed her head without being told, whispering a quiet thanks that made something sting at the corners of Jonah's eyes. Afterward, she explored the cabin, fingers brushing along the shelves, the single rifle by the door, the carved box that held his late wife's combs. Jonah watched from the doorway, feeling the old heavy silence of the house begin to shift. When night fell, she sat on the porch steps, chin on her knees, staring at the sky bright with stars. Jonah joined her, settling beside her without a word. After a long silence, she said softly, "I think I remember Mama singing. It sounded like water running." Jonah's throat tightened. "Hold on to that sound," he said. The wind picked up then, carrying the smell of distant rain. Somewhere down the road, A rider passed, a shadow against the starlit ridge. Jonah's hand went to the rifle by habit, and for a moment, unease settled over him like a second nightfall. Whoever it was didn't stop, just kept riding until the sound of hooves faded. The girl leaned into him without speaking, and Jonah knew the quiet wouldn't last forever. Someone, somewhere, was bound to come asking questions. The nights grew cooler as autumn crept over the flats. Jonah Pike woke one night to the sound of muffled crying. For a moment he thought it was only the wind whining at the shutters, but then he heard it again, sharp and human. He swung his feet to the floor and crossed to the cot where the girl lay twisting in her blanket, her face wet with tears. He crouched beside her, speaking low. "Hey now. You're safe." Her eyes flew open, wide and wild, and for a second she didn't seem to know him. Then she sagged, hiding her face in her hands. "She said she'd be back," the girl choked out. "She told me wait. I waited till the moon was gone. I thought if I stayed, she'd find me." Jonah's heart felt too big for his chest. He sat down on the edge of the cot and let her lean into his side, her thin shoulders shaking. "You did what you could," he said softly. "Desert don't give a soul much choice. You stayed alive, that's what she'd want." They sat until the fire burned low, the room filled with the smell of cooling ash. When she finally slept, Jonah stayed a while longer, staring at the lantern glow against the walls. It had been a long time since he'd sat like this, guarding someone's dreams. In the morning she was quiet, moving like a shadow as he went about the chores. He didn't press her to talk. Instead, he handed her the feed bucket and let her scatter grain for the hens. The simple work seemed to settle her. By noon she was asking questions again, pointing at the windmill and asking how it worked, tracing the path of water from pump to trough. Jonah showed her, even let her push the handle until the spout gurgled and splashed. Her smile was brief but real. That evening they sat on the porch together, the sky awash with rose and gold. She held a bit of twine, twisting it between her fingers. "What was her name?" Jonah asked gently. The girl hesitated, then said, "Miriam." He nodded once, as though committing it to memory. "Miriam," he repeated, and the name seemed to settle in the air like a prayer. When the sun slipped under the horizon, he told her about the cottonwood tree out back, where someone he once loved rested beneath the roots. "Wasn't her fault," he said quietly. "World just decided she wouldn't stay." The girl looked up at him, a question in her eyes. "My wife," Jonah explained after a pause. "She died bringin' a baby into the world. Neither of 'em made it." The girl didn't say anything, but she reached out and took his hand, her small fingers curling around his like a promise. In the days that followed, she grew bolder, trailing him to the barn, peeking around door frames, talking to the horse as though he could answer. Jonah found himself leaving little tasks for her, handing her nails while he mended the fence, letting her carry kindling in from the woodpile. One afternoon she appeared with a handful of bright red berries. "For the table," she announced proudly. Jonah crouched to inspect them. "Best not eat these, little one. Might be poison." Her face fell, and he saw how badly she wanted to give something back. "Tell you what," he said, taking the berries from her hand. "We'll dry 'em, string 'em up. Make the place look like it's got some cheer." That night, the cabin glowed with a garland of berries hanging over the mantel. The girl sat cross-legged on the floor, grinning at the sight. For the first time, Jonah thought, the house felt almost like it was breathing again. But the world outside was not so forgiving. When Jonah rode to town a few days later, a deputy stopped him on the boardwalk. "You know folks been asking who that girl is," the man said, leaning on the post. "Can't just keep her without some say-so. County might send someone." Jonah kept his face calm. "She's got no one else." "Might not be your choice to make," the deputy replied, his tone neither cruel nor kind, just the voice of law. Jonah nodded once and walked on, but the words followed him all the way home like a trail of dust. That night, as the girl braided the horse's mane by lantern light, Jonah felt a strange weight settle over him. The cabin was warm, the air rich with the smell of hay and smoke, but something in his gut said trouble was coming. When she finished the braid, she beamed up at him, waiting for his approval. "Looks fine," he said, though his voice sounded far away even to himself. Outside, the coyotes yipped under the new moon, a wild chorus that raised the hair on the back of his neck. Jonah glanced toward the road, dark and empty, and for the first time he wished it would stay that way. The first storm of the season rolled in slow, a wall of black clouds rising over the flats like a herd of bison. By late afternoon the air was thick and humming, every hair on Jonah Pike's arms standing on end. He brought the horses into the barn, the girl following close behind, her face pale. "Stay by the door," he told her as thunder cracked across the sky. The wind hit first, slamming the barn doors until he barred them. Dust swirled like ghosts around their ankles. The rain came next, hammering the roof until it drowned out everything else. Lightning split the sky, throwing white light across the girl's frightened face. Jonah crouched to her level. "Ain't nothin' to fear but noise. She'll pass." But when a deafening clap shook the rafters, she bolted forward and threw herself into his arms. He held her tight, her heartbeat hammering against his chest. They stayed that way until the storm's rage softened to a steady drumbeat. When they finally made a run for the cabin, both were soaked through, boots squelching on the floorboards. Jonah built the fire high until the room glowed, and hung their wet clothes near the hearth. The girl huddled in a blanket, eyes still wide, but some of the tension drained from her shoulders as the warmth wrapped around them. She dozed by the fire, and Jonah sat nearby, staring into the flames. The storm outside might have been passing, but a different one was building in his gut. The deputy's words hadn't left him. By dawn, the storm had blown clear. The desert was fresh-washed, puddles shining like scattered mirrors. Jonah was mending the fence rail when he saw the dust cloud on the horizon, a rider coming hard. His stomach tightened. It was Sheriff Mather, his oilskin slicker shining with the last of the rain. He reined up at the gate, squinting at Jonah with that steady lawman's gaze. "Morning," Jonah said, though his voice was clipped. "Morning," the sheriff returned. "Heard tell you been keeping a child out here." "That right." Jonah rested an arm on the fence. "That's right. She got kin anywhere? Someone to claim her?" "No one I know of. Found her near a wagon. Rest of it was picked clean." The sheriff sighed, pulling off his hat. "Jonah, you know how this works. County'll want to send her to the mission orphanage. Proper place for her." "She's got a place," Jonah said evenly. "Right here." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "You livin' out here alone. Folks in town are uneasy. Ain't saying you'd harm her, but you can't just keep her like a stray pup." Jonah straightened, his hand gripping the fence rail. "I'm feedin' her, keepin' her safe. Town's welcome to its talk, but it don't get a say in who I keep under my roof." "Careful, Jonah. You start standin' against the law, you'll find yourself on the wrong side of it." "Law's got to answer to the Almighty same as I do," Jonah said, voice low. "And I'll answer for her if it comes to that." The sheriff studied him a long moment, then put his hat back on. "I'll give you time," he said finally. "But this won't stay quiet." Jonah watched him ride away, a dark shape against the brightening sky. When he turned, the girl was standing in the doorway, barefoot, her face pale as milk. "They're gonna take me?" she asked, her voice thin. Jonah crossed the yard in 3 strides and crouched in front of her. "Not if I can help it." But she shook her head hard, backing away. "I don't want them to put me somewhere. I'll run before I let 'em." "Don't talk like that," Jonah said, but she was already turning, slipping past him, her small body quick as a jackrabbit. He cursed under his breath and chased after her, boots pounding the wet earth. He found her at the edge of the flats, rain still glistening on the sagebrush, her breath coming in panicked gasps. Jonah knelt in the mud, hands held out. "Listen to me. No one's taking you anywhere tonight. Not tomorrow either, if I've got anything to say about it. But you can't be running off. You hear me? You're mine to look after now." Her chin trembled, but she stepped toward him, and he gathered her up, carrying her back through the wet grass. By the time they reached the cabin, her small arms were wrapped around his neck, holding tight. Inside, the fire had burned low. Jonah stoked it, then sat with her in the chair until her breathing evened out against his chest. He stared at the door, listening to the drip of rain from the eaves. When she finally slept, he whispered into the dim room, "They'll have to come through me first." Lightning flared again far off in the hills, but no thunder followed, just a silence so deep it seemed to listen back. Jonah knew the quiet was temporary. Trouble had a way of finding its way down even the loneliest road. The morning broke sharp and clear, the sky washed pale from the night's rain. Jonah Pike saddled the horse at first light, his jaw set like stone. The girl watched him from the doorway, clutching her blanket around her shoulders. "Where we goin'?" she asked. "Back where I found you," he said, tightening the cinch. "We got something needs finishing." She climbed onto the saddle without another word, her small hands gripping the horn. Jonah swung up behind her, and together they rode out across the flats. The land still glistened from the storm, puddles shining like bits of glass. In the distance, a hawk circled, its cry sharp against the wind. They reached the place by noon, the scattered bones of the wagon still there, half buried in sand. The air smelled faintly of wet earth, rare and sweet. Jonah swung down and helped her to the ground. "Stay close," he said, and began to search. They found the grave near a dry creek bed, marked only by a small pile of stones. The girl stood silent, staring at it as though the world had gone still. "Mama?" she asked, voice breaking. Jonah crouched and touched the stones. "Looks like somebody gave her rest," he said gently. The girl knelt, fingers trembling as she rearranged the stones into a neater stack. Jonah cut a spray of wildflowers from the creek's edge and laid them there. "She ain't out here no more," Jonah said softly. "But you are. And she'd want you to keep livin', not waitin'." The girl nodded slowly, tears carving clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. When they rode back toward the ranch, a dust trail appeared on the horizon, 2 riders this time, coming steady. Jonah's shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn back. It was Sheriff Mather and the deputy. They drew up by the gate, their horses sweating from the run. "You knew we'd come," the sheriff said. "I knew," Jonah replied, sliding down from the saddle. The girl stayed seated, staring at the lawmen with wide, frightened eyes. "Jonah, this don't have to turn into trouble," the sheriff said. "But you can't keep her without the county's say-so. There's places meant for children like her." Jonah's voice was calm but carried like thunder. "She's not a problem to be handed off. She's a person. And she's got a home here if she wants it." "That ain't the question." "It's the only question that matters," Jonah cut in. "Ask her where she wants to be." The sheriff's brow furrowed, but he turned to the girl. "Child, do you want to come with us?" She shook her head hard, clutching the saddle horn. "No, I want to stay." The deputy shifted in the saddle, but the sheriff held up a hand. For a long moment there was only the creak of leather and the low groan of the windmill. "Jonah Pike," the sheriff said finally, "you just made yourself responsible for her in front of God and the law. You'd better mean it." "I do," Jonah said simply. The sheriff studied him, then tipped his hat. "Then see she's raised right. This is the last time we ride out here about it." They turned and rode back the way they'd come, their figures growing small against the horizon. Jonah stood in the dust, watching until they were gone, then turned back to the girl. "You heard him," he said, lifting her down from the horse. "Reckon that makes it official." She looked up at him, her face shining with a smile that was small but fierce. That night, Jonah built a new fire, bigger than he'd made in a long while. The girl set the table herself, lining up 2 tin cups, a plate of bread, a pot of beans. When they sat down, she bowed her head again, whispering her thanks, and Jonah found himself doing the same. After supper, she took his old pocket-knife and carved something into a scrap of wood. When she showed it to him, it was a crooked little heart with 2 letters inside, J and M. Jonah turned it over in his hands, throat tight. "Guess we ought to hang this up somewhere," he said. She nodded solemnly, and together they fixed it over the door. When darkness fell, they left the lantern burning on the porch. The wind moved through the grass, soft and low, and the air smelled of wet sage. Jonah sat on the step, the girl leaning against him, her breathing slow. It wasn't a mansion or a wedding or a promise made loud, the old narrator might have said if someone had been there to write it down. It was beans on a wooden table, and the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching. And maybe that's how homes are made, one small kindness at a time. The windmill turned steady above them, its creak like a lullaby, and Jonah Pike, who had thought himself a man built for solitude, felt the quiet of the land settle into something else entirely. Something like peace. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.